Hi, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Bob Meek. I'm a lawyer with the Disability Rights Network of Pennsylvania. We're the statewide protection and advocacy agency for people with disabilities in Pennsylvania. And personally, I've been a lawyer for 35 years, working for poor people and people with disabilities. And recently, along with a group of other lawyers and organizations like the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project and the ACLU, and Carrie Zwardowski, the civil rights firm that many people know about, we brought an action against the Department of Corrections on behalf of prisoners in solitary confinement who have mental illness in Pennsylvania. And we have actually, I have copies of the complaint so you can sort of see how we've detailed the various problems that we've all heard about today already, but these are specific to Pennsylvania. And we also had, as part of the case, we detailed the stories of 12 people, 10 men and 2 women who were in solitary confinement. One of them was deceased. But to sort of really give a real flavor for what it's like for people in solitary, especially people with mental illness, because one of the things that one of the speakers mentioned is that psychological torment that is created by being held in a cell that's as big as a bathroom for years on end, and a number of the people we talk about have been in solitary for years, because what happens, they get into solitary because they can't conform their behavior to the rules, or they're acting out in response to their own demons, shall we say, and then they act out again while they're in solitary and they get more time. And so we have a couple of guys that their solitary time goes on for another 30 or 40 years if they were unfortunate enough to serve a sentence that long. But one of the problems is that people just end up getting streeted after being in solitary. They can't adjust. They're back in prison in no time at all, especially people with mental illness, because the lack of services in the community is ridiculously bad. And so these guys never ever get to access services. They never get there. So the good thing is that we're making the department pay attention to this problem. Our organization actually personally began investigating, I personally began investigating in 2005. We went to probably a little over half the state prisons in Pennsylvania and interviewed hundreds of inmates in solitary, collected hundreds of records from those regarding those inmates, their mental health records and their disciplinary records. And we had them reviewed by a forensic psychiatrist who advised us on how to respond to the department regarding treatment needs of those individuals. So essentially what we found was that people in solitary get zero mental health treatment, or sort of this what we call drive-by treatment. The counselors walk by and say, "How you doing?" and keep on walking. And of course there's lots of people who, because of their mental illness, are very withdrawn. They don't leave their cells for weeks and months at a time. Prisoners would tell us about some of those guys who they wouldn't even come out to talk to us, but they would tell us about, "You gotta go see this guy. He never goes out of his cell, ever." And so that's a real problem, because that person's getting zilch in terms of treatment, and they're just deteriorating. They're never going to be able to recover from their illness because of the treatment they're receiving there, and the lack of treatment, and certainly the lack of concern on the part of officials. So the good news, I guess, is that the Department of Corrections very quickly responded to our complaint, which, as I said, I have copies that you can have. Because I think they realized 2 things. One, we had a very powerful case. And 2, we also created a very powerful legal team, so they would be worried about it. The one partner I didn't mention in our case is a big law firm in New York, Confinement in Burlington, or so are bankers of the case, and also part of the brains. So that's the idea. My idea was to create a formidable legal team and have a very long-term investigation where we'd gather a great many facts, so that they were irrefutable facts, and a very tough team to contend with. And so they did respond, and we've been in negotiations with them since we filed the complaint in March. These sorts of cases are not ones that resolve themselves quickly. Unfortunately, that's the bane of my existence. Most of my cases are last forever. It seems that way anyway. And so this is going to be one of those. But I think that ultimately we will get to a good end. And one of the things that's going to happen, I think, at least my goal is, that not only is it going to affect just the inmates who cycle through segregation, who have mental illness, but I think it's going to actually improve one of our goals is to keep anybody with a mental health diagnosis out of solitary. That's #1 goal. And certainly to prevent them being written up for manifestations of their mental illness. But the other thing is, I think that they're going to reform, I hope, they're going to reform how they classify people with mental illness, and also that they are going to create more units that are in general pop, that are treatment units, so that we get the effect will be broader than simply the addressing the several hundred people, around 800 at any given time, of inmates with serious mental illness in segregation. So my optimistic thinking is that we'll get a sort of a bigger splash, a bigger bang for our buck in this case. At least that's my hope. And of course, things being what they are, the government often will talk a good game, but when it comes down to it, they don't want to do what we want them to do. So we may have to litigate this case anyway. But I'm pretty confident we'll do fine. We have a half-decent judge, and we have a very good legal team. So I think that we'll be successful ultimately, but only time will tell. So take a read of the complaint. And the other thing I should mention is you actually can get a copy of the complaint on our website. The RN's website is, my website is www.drnpa.org, Disability Rights Network of Pennsylvania. And we don't just do prison work, we do all kinds of stuff for people with disabilities. I personally do a lot of institutional work. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, sure.
So, yeah, that's...
David?
All right.